This is Mercy Pilkington for GoodEReader.com at Digital Book World. Interviewing right now Evan Ratliff from Atavist. He's going to sit down and talk with us about what the platform does for both the authors, the readers, and the industry as a whole. Thank you for talking to us, Evan.
My pleasure.
So what can you tell us about Atavist?
So we do two things primarily. One is that we're actually a publisher, so we publish our own nonfiction. They're kind of going under the name e-singles generally now, but they're stories that are longer than magazine stories and shorter than books. So they usually run word length 5,000 words to 35,000 words, so maybe a 50-page book. And they're all digital. We sell them on the Kindle, the Nook. We also sell them in an app for the iPad and the iPhone that we made that allows us to create heavily multimedia versions. So oftentimes there is video embedded, oftentimes there's sound, there's an audiobook included, so you can flip back and forth between listening and reading, and it keeps your place. And we're sort of famous for doing things like, we had a story about a Swedish robbery, and we incorporated the surveillance footage, the actual real surveillance footage, into the reported story, so it's sort of a part of the way you get carried along in the story itself. So we produce those. We put out 10, and we'll put out probably 12 to 18 this year, about one a month, give or take. And then the second thing that we do is we produce a software platform that other publishers use to produce, whether it's books or short books, long books, articles, magazines. They use it for all sorts of things. So it enables them to create an app that they can do the sort of multimedia things that we do. It allows them to create these sort of EPUB versions or Mobi versions that Kindle uses. It sort of spits out all these versions. And then in the spring, we're actually opening that up to authors in general. So there'll be a free version that authors will be able to use, and then there's a sort of higher-end license version that's more customized for big publishers.
Okay, and you mentioned that you primarily are working in nonfiction, but of course in the spring you'll open up to other authors. Do you see this as a way to revitalize the short story format that used to be so popular in American literature, but it's kind of now we only find them really in anthologies? Do you see that as a good tool for that?
I think we could see that, yeah. I think that, we don't publish fiction, partly because just the founders and editors, we came from the nonfiction world, so we're really afraid of publishing bad fiction if we start publishing fiction. So that's part of the idea around opening the platform a little bit, is just seeing what people do with it, not just the form, so the length, but also what will people do with the ability to use multimedia. And it may or may not work in fiction. You see a variety of attempts at different things, and some of them work, some of them don't. But I think more than the publishing industry driving it, I think you'll see authors actually driving what happens with, whether it's form or the actual content of the story.
Have you found any use for the application in terms of, we find journalists for some major name platforms that they kind of get stuck in mode. This is what you write about, this is what you cover. Have they gotten to branch out thanks to the short but yet longer format than they enjoy in a magazine?
We have had that. So we have writers who, they work for magazines. Generally, magazines have limited word lengths, sometimes very constricted, much more constricted than they were, a decade or two ago. So they're really able to stretch out and tell a story. And it also happens that the kind of stories that we like and that we publish, they're very heavily narrative, which is another thing that, most magazine pieces or newspaper pieces, they have to be newsy, they have to be on topic, on the news, have a hook, as they call it. But we don't really worry about that. If there's a story that's 50 years old, but they can tell it in an amazing way and report it out, we're happy, to publish it. The only problem is we're so small, we actually publish a very few number of stories every year, so we can only kind of open up that ability for a few authors.
And last question, I guess, do you see with newspapers and magazines, so many of them going to digital, do you think that this will actually open up the word count on content, or do you think they're going to still be constricted to that smaller word count for print?
It will definitely open up the word count. It's actually very strange that when we started the Atavist, part of the impetus for it was that digitally there weren't these opened up word counts. There weren't people writing longer, and there's no real reason for it. You have infinite space. It costs you nothing to write something longer. It was more about the cost of producing it, so the cost of sending a reporter out, as opposed to having someone sit at a computer and opine on politics or something like that. It's much cheaper to do. So that end of it sort of remains the same. So it's a question of whether they want to get into paying for long-form journalism, as we sometimes call it, But to me, it's worth it because if you're going to ask your readers to pay for something, if you're not going to give it away for free, if you're going to say, we would like you to come pay, even as we do at $2 or $3, you have to give them something that's different than what they can find for free all over the web. So that means in-depth stories where someone has really spent the time to go find out what happened and then tell you in a beautiful way.
That's great. Thank you so much for talking to us today. Again, this is Mercy Pilkington for Good eReader at the Digital Book Expo.